We're live every time. Oh, that's much better. Everybody was like super tiny, and now boom, it's like the Diamond Dallas Page thing. Everybody got big. What's happening, Kevin? What's happening, wrestling fans? Once again, I am amazed by technology that brings us to your wherever you're watching us from every night, or not every night.
And
Or
by
maybe you do watch
us,
us. Maybe you do watch
by
us every night. I'm
I
just going
mean,
to shut up. For a
you could watch the Two Bros Wrestling Show anytime. We're live once a week, but I mean, we're available 24/7 when the wrestling fans need, uh, a deep dive on a topic or the latest wrestling news.
Or
You
they're
can watch
feeling
us anytime.
like, wow, there's no wrestling on right now. Oh, wait a minute. There's never no wrestling on anymore.
Well, that's a great segue, Doug, for the Two Bros Wrestling Show's main event topic tonight. We're getting ready to preview next Saturday's AEW Collision. So more wrestling for your wrestling weekly calendar, 2 hours on a Saturday night beginning this upcoming Saturday. And oh, Doug, by the way, CM Punk's going to be there if you haven't heard.
Didn't he?
I know.
Wait.
He had a cup of coffee back in the old Ring of Honor, I believe. If you
Thanks.
remember those days.
I hear he's wrestling with. Apparently, he can't work a match because I understand it's going to be a trios match to bring him back and everything. So they want to ease the poor guy back into things.
The poor guy. We will be talking about that poor guy and everything that there is to do with AEW's Collision, the good, the bad, what we expect, all in our main event topic. But Doug, before we hit the main event topic, we have to hit an opening bell.
Ding, ding, ding. Love it. Let's do it.
Let's do the opening bell. The main news in wrestling this week is something I'm actually going to save for the end of our news segment, as we do a tribute. I think we all know where that's going, but let's start with some more bizarre news. WWE's bizarre relationship with Twitch, the platform, social media platform, continues. You might recall last year WWE issued an edict to wrestlers saying that they could no longer control their own social media platforms under their own names because WWE owned the names, and that was outside of WWE's control. So this was really specifically targeting Twitch, which had become lucrative for talent such as the New Day, Paige, and Zelina. The discontent even ended up with those last two leaving, at least those two women leaving for a small while. Obviously, Zelina came back. Fast forward though, and it's a New Day. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
So WWE and Twitch announced this week a new multi-year partnership that allows WWE to sort of take control, I guess, of some of the previously controversial superstar channels. Though one imagines, the big difference now being that WWE has control and obviously gets a cut of any of those profits. They also announced that the deal called for live and exclusive content. And while we don't know exactly what all that might mean, one thing we do know is, because it started this past week, is that they now have what they're calling a side cast to Monday Night Raw. It began on Monday, and each week is going to be hosted by a different WWE talent. So if any of you all caught the Twitch sidecast this last Monday night, drop it in the comments and let us know what you thought and how it went, because I did not see that.
So, and this is hot on the heels too of Twitch changing a lot of their income policies apparently, but then completely walking that back almost immediately after a whole bunch of backlash and a lot of their top creators threatening to just straight up leave the platform because this would basically leave them with no way to make a living. Interesting. It's been a busy week for Twitch.
It's been a busy week for Twitch, and let's see where this goes and how long this relationship actually lasts. You got the over-under on that. I'm not sure if it's going to be a year or not, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it works out for all involved.
It always does.
Always does. Congratulations to Trevor Murdoch and Mike Knox for being this year's winners of the NWA Crockett Cup. Billy Corgan's version of the NWA revised and revitalized the Crockett Cup a few years back. The Briscoe brothers have been winners, for example, but Murdoch and Knox were the last ones standing in this year's field of 22 teams, beat Blunt Force Trauma, who were led by Aaron Stevens in the final match to walk away with that cup. Doug, you remember the Crockett Cup back in the day?
I do
the
indeed.
Original Crockett Cup?
I do indeed remember the Crockett Cup. That's one great thing, about Billy Corrigan. He's an old school. Well, he's probably close to our age, just a little bit older than us, I'm sure, but not much. But he remembers the old school, the territory days, the glory days, if you will.
I remember my memory of the Crockett Cup was one of it maybe being the first time that this young Mark saw teams that were international. Like I knew that there were, American territories and that there was like this mystical place across the sea that people went to. I would hear of Japanese teams, but because the Crockett Cup was a one-time event that was bringing in teams from around the world to win that $1 million, they would send these pre-tapes. And so suddenly I'm like seeing, at least snippets of Japanese wrestling and European wrestling. And to me, it was like the greatest thing in the world. Like, oh my gosh, this is really important. They're coming from all over the world for this thing. But anyway, congrats to this year's Crockett Cup winners. It's nice seeing those things get revived. While we're sending out congratulations, let's also, Doug, send out some get well wishes to one Liv Morgan. We knew Liv was injured. I think we talked about it last week about her and Raquel having to forfeit the women's tag titles as a result of it. But now we have specifics from Liv herself as to exactly what's going on. She reported in an interview what she referred to as a torn shoulder. Likely this is a rotator cuff injury. And then depending on the severity of whether or not she needs surgery, obviously will dictate just how long it is that she's out. It's usually about 6 months on the shelf if you have to have the surgery. And we'll follow up and report more as we know it. Either way, get well soon, Liv.
Get well, Liv.
A little less wrestling, I guess, to watch, Doug. I know we're talking about more wrestling to watch, but wrestling adjacent programming, and this one's one I'm actually sad about, is that Young Rock is officially canceled by NBC after 3 seasons. We knew it was on the bubble. We'd reported that here on the show in our opening bell before, but the official word continues a string of bad news for The Rock and his many projects. I guess it's sort of been piling up since following Black Adam and not getting sequels there. And then the XFL's like lost 60 million or something ridiculous like that. And now Young Rock, which was a very entertaining sitcom for those of you that did not watch it. It was a heartwarming family sitcom, loosely based, well, not loosely based, really based on The Rock's life, obviously fictionalized some for comedy, but despite really strong reviews, the show itself fell off in viewership dramatically in season 3, which honestly is not unusual for any network programming these days, with cord cutting becoming as quick as it is. It is a shame, though. I was looking forward to see how they handled how they presented Rock Austin, for example, in the show. And I just wanted to see Becky Lynch some more as Cyndi Lauper, which was very entertaining. watching the man portray Cyndi.
Oh, that's funny.
And Doug, we'll end the opening bell segment tonight. I hinted at it earlier with a tribute to just one of the all-time greats, one of the more unique lives and characters that you will ever have in the world of professional wrestling. But the Iron Sheik passed away this week at the age of 81. The WWE Hall of Famer began as an amateur wrestler for the Iranian national team. So unlike a lot of guys back in the day who, were billed from Moscow and were from Pittsburgh or something like that.
Right.
Yes. Hossein Khosrav Ali Vazari was actually, thank you. Been practicing that. No, he was from Tehran and was not just a legit Iranian, but was a legit tough dude. He was an amateur wrestler who was on the Iranian national team. He was so tough, he was actually a bodyguard for a few years for the Shah of Iran. When he had Olympic aspirations and was supposed to be in the Olympics, was training for it. But when his mentor and one of his idols in amateur wrestling from Iran was suspiciously found dead, believed to be murdered by the state, fearing for his own life, Khosrav fled to the United States in the late 1960s and would begin a relationship with American wrestling, the amateur style. He was a coach for the U.S. Olympic wrestling squads. And then by 1972, he was invited by the legendary Vern Gagne to train as a pro wrestler. And believe it or not, Doug, they positioned him as a babyface to begin with. Dude had hair and everything else, the old AWA. But it was not very long before they realized the money was in turning him into a character. Right. They wanted to make him similar to the madman, the Sheik, the Sabu's uncle, the Sheik. So that's where the Iron Sheik name came from. He trained in the same AWA class that produced Ric Flair, and then Sheik himself would help because he was such a good amateur wrestler, which Vern absolutely loved, legit tough guys. Sure. So that's
right.
Using one of the students to train other students, but Sheik would go on to train Ricky Steamboat, Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell, among many others. So after leaving AWA, Sheik spent a year in WWF before drifting through various NWA territories, including Mid-South, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, Florida. This is where I first encountered Sheik. I'll get back to that. But in 1983, Sheik returned to WWF and shocked the world by putting an end to the long reign of Bob Backlund, became the world champion. It was a transition. It was a way to get the belt from Backlund to Hulk Hogan. So that's really how probably the Sheik is most known. His most famous match, I guess, would be dropping the title to Hulk Hogan in, 20 seconds or something along those lines.
But how much did he make Hogan by doing that? First, you take it off you take it off Bob Backlund, and then Hogan, the All-American hero, comes in. And how over did he make Hogan with that, though?
He made Hogan and made Hulkamania, because that was the start of Hulk Hogan being the biggest draw of the 1980s. Sheik would go on to feud with Hogan, but then transitioned into a patriotic feud with Iran versus the U.S. and Sergeant Slaughter. That was obviously made for those specific times. But I think he's probably best remembered by most wrestling fans of that era, probably for the more long-running run he had in WWF was as a tag team with Nikolai Volkov.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember those feuds they had with Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda and things like that? So, Doug, my first memory of Sheik was that NWA run, because you and I, we've talked about this. We grew up Mid-Atlantic, Georgia Championship Wrestling / then NWA, WCW kind of kids, and I think. And I don't have like the exact date or anything, but I believe that the first wrestling show I ever saw in person, I saw the Iron Sheik working his famous Persian Club gimmick. Here was the Logan, West Virginia Memorial Fieldhouse. Dude's in the middle of the ring, and this was a shoot. He would use this as angles with opponents, but he'd also would challenge folks from the crowd to come and take those Persian clubs and acrobatically swing them above his head. And I remember, watching, this is probably 82-ish, so I'm 9-10 years old, sitting there watching, many of my fellow rednecks get up there and fail miserably, not just to swing them above their head. These guys could not get them up off the ground. He was something else, man. Obviously, after his wrestling career was over, he became almost just as famous in pop culture with his appearances on Howard Stern. He really learned the monetary value of being an internet troll.
Yes, he did. My goodness. To this day, go check out his Twitter feed. My goodness.
Oh, he trolled Hogan up until like a couple weeks before Iron Sheik passed away. I mean, he still was running up on Hogan, man. What are some of your memories of the Iron Sheik? What did you think of him back in the day?
I was scared of him. I was legit scared of him. I was a little kid, just terrified of him. I mean, the man could do his job. And I have a very similar story, because I think, on this tour they came through, I didn't see him in Logan. I'm pretty sure the Boone Memorial or the Boone Fieldhouse, Madison Fieldhouse, I don't even remember what it was called, but they come through there, and I remember Ox Baker, Pistol Paz Watley, Iron Sheik, is just terrified of all these, especially Alex Baker, more so than the Iron Sheik because he had the heart punch. But
Oh yeah, he's killed a man. That's what they used to say,
exactly,
right?
exactly. But man, dude just scared me. I mean, just legit scared me. I mean, my favorite tag team is Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. I was the all white babyface kid, when I was growing up. So yeah, Sheik was terrifying. Later in life, he became just hilarious,
Oh,
but
he was
and
hilarious.
incredibly entertaining. But it's and I really don't think that people do put enough on him for putting Hogan over because it takes two to do that. And you had the ultimate bad guy in him for when he was in the WWF at the time, to put Hogan over like that.
And if Sheik is to be believed, now Greg Gagne denies it, but Greg's dad, Vern, who was the head of the AWA, reportedly was offering Iron Sheik a fairly large bounty for that match to sabotage it and break Hulk Hogan's leg, which, to his credit, being a professional, Iron Sheik did not.
Yeah.
But he never let Hogan forget the fact that if I wanted to, I could have humbled you.
Yep.
And you do not want to get humbled by the Iron Sheik.
You do not want to get humbled by the Sheik. No, sir.
Google it if you don't get that one.
Yeah. If you know, wrestling fans.
That's just one that they broke the mold on. There will not be another Iron Sheik.
Indeed.
He was the real, as
Absolutely.
he would say.
He was
Cameraman, zoom it. Yeah. Rest in peace, Iron Sheik. Doug, with that, are you ready to move on to the main event?
Let's have a collision. Let's do this.
I like that. Let's do this. Because AEW is going to do it, so we're going to do it. Here's a way to transition from our news to our main event. Because here's an item that is a news item that really ties in with Collision. So last week, we reported that CM Punk's return was made official by Tony Khan. This week, we know that announcement's effect has been on ticket sales. They've moved an additional 900 tickets since announcing that Punk was coming. So AEW's first Collision is right now sitting at around 8,200 tickets for a venue that holds 10,000, which, not bad. It's probably going to get pretty close to being a capacity, what they'll call a capacity crowd. And 900 is not anything to sneeze at, Doug, but it is also not exactly a rush of anticipation either.
Especially in Chicago, Kevin. Especially in Chicago. And it sounds like, unless there's been some dramatic update that I've missed over the weekend, it sounds like a lot of tickets really aren't moving in the other venues like they had hoped.
So a lot of these are Canadian cities, and AEW apparently is not available across all of Canada. So they may have miscalculated the influence of the product in that area. But Toronto has only sold 1,800 tickets total, last I checked. Hamilton, Regina, and Calgary are at 700, 1,300, and 3,400 respectively. So Regina is at 700 tickets sold. I don't know what the capacity is for the building there, Regina, but I imagine it's not 1,000 people. So it's not going to look like a full house unless something changes drastically and quickly. So Doug, let's start our conversation right here with the elephant that is in the room. Before we get into Collision as a whole, let's talk Punk. Do you think Punk's presence back in AEW is detrimental or beneficial to AEW Collision? And do you think it was even necessary to launch Collision?
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessary to launch Collision. It's one more wrestling that I'm going to struggle to keep up with during the week. But beyond that, Tony Khan has a huge roster, and a lot of these folks aren't doing anything right now. It is good that some of these folks will now get television time, but I still don't know at the end of the day. And I think we do need to point out that these markets that they are in Canada are traditionally difficult markets to crack for wrestling anyway. So
Yeah.
they were handicapped going in. So is this, the question could be asked, and I'm sure it will be in AEW's defense: is this because of the market or is this because of Punk? Now, my 2 cents is this is because of Punk and because of the market. You once again, it's never really an absolute anything, but I think once again we're seeing a mix of these two things with the markets they're going into, traditionally tough to crack, and you have this guy who you either love or you either hate at this point, as a wrestling fan, I'm pretty sure, and pretty much probably as a wrestler if you have to deal with him. I mean, we've all heard the rumors that Punk is on Collision and that's Punk's show, so everybody who gets along with Punk can go over there. The people who get along with the Elite can stay on Dynamite and by default Rampage, I guess. But I don't know.
So
It
is that
seems
detrimental to the product to have someone who's so divisive that you have to have a show where you put all his friends to keep them away
right.
from the other folks? I mean, is it worth bringing back someone? I mean, in some ways, the ticket sales are at this point, put them to the side, and maybe that'll sort itself out. Take Punk out of the equation, and the long-term viability of Collision, I'm not sure would change one way or the other, whether or not he was there or not.
Just like these Canadian markets, I think that Saturday night, unless it's like some sort of special, right? I think that Saturday night consistently week after week is also a hard market to crack, if you will. It's just hard. I mean, it's Saturday night. I wonder what their live numbers are going to be on a Saturday night and what their like playback numbers are going to be, because I
So
will most like.
If you're trying to crack a Saturday night, which is tough for an audience anyway, aren't you actually handicapping yourself by putting a talent on there that keeps you from booking your entire roster as you see fit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because
I'm just trying to make the argument. I think that in this
here,
instance, the Punk situation is actually a handicap to what should be a big deal. And instead of, I know they're playing it up like this is the return of CM Punk. This is Punk's show. Go check it out. But I actually think that Collision's long-term chances would actually be better, or the product could be better, if Punk was not. I mean, how long is it going to be before something happens and he's the detriment to the product again?
Right. Because, I mean, you and I were there live the first time he went into business for himself, even though he's claiming that. And it was just so confusing to the live crowd. And you watch it back on TV, and it's equally as confusing, when he's calling out Hangman before he gets on to it's. This isn't even in the program, right?
Yeah.
So how long is it before that happens again? Because I'll be the first to say I was a huge CM Punk mark,
Same.
but then that media scrum afterwards, it's like, what is up with this dude? Is he? What is going on here? And then, of course, the brawl out or all out after that. So
we're on the same page here that Punk is actually not necessary for launch of a new show. And in the long run, we both feel that he could be what derails it rather than makes it enticing television.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you look at the build up right to this, when Tony Khan had announcements about announcements, he had to back off of one of his announcements because I guess at that point he wasn't even sure if Punk was going to sign because Ace Steel or I don't know, some nonsense with him needing assurances that Ace had basically a job. Right. Yeah. And last I heard, Ace is a producer on Collision, but he can't produce on site. He's phoned it in literally.
So if you really have a talent who has so much control that it is his show and his friends work it and his friends can have jobs, and as soon as he has cross words with, the next Elite or, anybody backstage
right.
gets on his wrong side, are they gone? Are they, Wednesday nights only? Like, how much control is he going to have and how much drama will that create in the roster?
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering too. How much does this cost Tony Khan in the long run? I get it. He's a big name. He's a big draw. At this point, you probably want to keep him close. Business wise, I'm trying to make it make sense.
Yeah.
But I just can't. I mean, I think in
Beyond
the
that first show, Chicago, and the shock
right.
of, hey, CM Punk's back, I just think long term, I'm afraid that it's short-sightedness on Tony Khan's part, that the long-term damage to having Punk back in your locker room it outweighs any short-term gain of the shock of a wrestling fan by going, oh my gosh, he brought CM Punk back. That'll be short-lived. And it's almost hard to shock us these days. I mean, yeah, you'll get a pop.
Really, yeah.
We'll all tune in because we want to see if it's a train wreck or not, but long-term value.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there won't be Colt Cabana wrestling on our Saturday nights. We could probably figure that.
No Colt.
Unfortunately, it's impossible to talk Collision without talking Punk, but I wanted to get Punk out of the way because that is the elephant in a room. But let's, if we can, move the Punk issue to the side, and let's just talk AEW Collision in general. A little history here. There's two paths really that this can take. Obviously, there's the empire that is the current WWE. That sprung from Raw being so popular and having too big a roster that we needed to have. It'd be hard to imagine the WWE and a developmental system and NXT and a streaming service. It would be impossible to envision any of that had it not been for Friday Night SmackDown. Growth and diversifying your product is a good thing, but then there's also the cautionary tale of WCW, who decided they were going to take Nitro from 2 to 3 hours and then launch Thursday Night Thunder at the same time. And creatively, it was just spreading that company too thin. And many an expert, including those who were involved with the product at that time, say that those decisions by TBS wanting more programming hastened the downfall of that company. It's a real make it or break it moment, in other words, for AEW right now. And Doug, do you think it is clear? Do you think that's closer to WWE's expansion or WCW spreading themselves too thin? Or is neither of those examples fair? And this is a third thing.
You know, I think the intent here is to make it more like the Raw to SmackDown and not do a Thursday Night Thunder, because I remember back in the day, Thursday Night Thunder became like a throwaway show. It wasn't essential viewing. No storylines were advanced. Like you had, you got to the D-list players being on this show. It was
creative control. Some of those folks decided that I don't have to work when I don't want to. I'm not doing that Thursday night thing.
Exactly. And I'm glad you bring that up, because that does circle back around to, oh, okay, yeah, I don't work with Punk, so you're never going to see me on, because we all know the money here is, with the Punk and the Elite. And that's where the money is going to be with this. But
and you can't do it.
You can't do it because apparently allegedly there's all these legal documents saying they can't even talk about it now. So you can't make a story out of it. You just got to walk around and pretend it didn't happen. But eventually somebody's going to run into somebody in catering or something.
So do you think then that this might be more the WCW deal, that people might look back at this moment and going, that's when Tony overshot?
I think so. I hate to say that. I do. I hate to say that, but I think Tony has a good thing going, because he can still keep Rampage hot, with a couple of really good matches in that hour. He's got Dynamite is great. I may be wrong, and I hope I am, because wrestling, but I just don't see this working out for the best. There's just too much stink on it already, I think.
So let's talk the business side, just the pure numbers business side. We don't know the total financial details of this. One tidbit that we have learned is because Tony Khan said in an interview here recently that the addition of Collision did not extend the deal that AEW already has in place with Warner Brothers Discovery, which is reported to be for around $44 million a year. And that ends at the end of this year, with some rumors saying that Warner Brothers has the option to extend it one more year. So at the very least, we're looking at end of 2023 or end of 2024 that they are going to get a new deal. Some folks thought when this was announced, it was a sign that the Hall had re-upped and they're all like taking a bath in all this new money. That actually isn't the case, at least just yet, at least from the way that Tony made it sound. It's expected, though, that AEW's next deal will command a lot more than $44 million a year. So, in that regard, Collision being a success is going to go a long way towards making sure AEW is profitable, sees an increase in budget for talent and production, and gets that big extension. Your numbers are going to be better if Collision is an out of the gate success. As a business move, I think the addition of Collision is probably, therefore, a worthwhile gamble, but it is a gamble.
It is indeed a gamble. And let's not forget, Tony Khan also has a second wrestling company.
He does one now?
That he does not have on television.
No. So from the business aspect, if I was the businessman, I would understand it in the same way that you would buy Ring of Honor because it's available for next to nothing. The opportunity to expand your empire the way that WWE has done, and regardless of the fact that they want to be competition to WWE, make no mistake about it that Tony Khan is a lifelong wrestling fan, and therefore, whether he intentionally does so or not, many of the things that he does or tries to replicate or tries to outdo is chasing Vince McMahon and WWE, because that is the blueprint.
Absolutely.
And it's how WWE did it. That's how they grew. So I understand reaching for that brass ring on the business side. This is where it gets to the other part of the topic I want to talk about. The creative side is where I'm a little worried. And I think we've hinted at it up to this point as part of the broader discussion, but it's a little more difficult to call. While I can, on the business side, say good move, on the creative side, how much is too much? Is Tony's attention now too divided? You mentioned having another company. I think that if there's one thing that does hamstring Tony from time to time, as much as I love Dynamite and AEW, is some hot shot booking by Tony, just running through things fast, and occasionally can be a weak point of AEW for me. Adding this along to ROH, won't that make that tendency of Tony, especially if he's trying to do things quickly and has 2 more hours to fill, won't that make it even worse?
Unless he is going to, loosen those reins a little bit. Maybe Larry and Ace Steel are, booking for Collision for all we know, Kevin. I mean,
well,
really.
what we do know is that he supposedly has brought Daniel Bryan in with a larger role on the creative side. I'm supportive of that. I actually don't think it's a bad thing for someone to go, I had a hot run, I had some good ideas, but I can't do this week after week. I think that Tony letting other folks in on the creative process, and I think that's would be a positive in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you got, I guess he had Regal for a while, but Regal decided to go back home, essentially. So
yeah, literally, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a great wrestling mind he had there. I mean, he's got great producers. He's got, Dean Malenko backstage, producing, matches, but who does he have really on creative? I mean, besides him.
And that's an awful lot for anyone. I mean, the wrestling history books are full of bookers who start out great, angles that start out hot. I don't care if you want to go to the NWO or all the way back to, Funk Briscoe. I mean, you could go back through anything and find that you go to the well over and over and over until it stops making money. And a lot of these guys never had those kind of good ideas again. I'm not saying that's where Tony is, but burnout. I mean, Paul Heyman will show you that, ECW really, really hot. Next thing you know, they can't even pay their bills and everyone's left. And it's just, running a wrestling promotion is hard, especially when you're doing the business side and the creative side. So I think Tony would do himself some favors. Even if Collision wasn't on the table and on the docket, he would do himself some favors to let another creative team have his ear. The way that again, I know you can think what you want about Vince McMahon, and yes, the final say was always his, but he didn't try to do every last thing by himself. He would cuss you out and call you a bunch of names if he didn't like your ideas. But if he liked your ideas, he just signed off on them and things happen. There's no one person that could do all of what needs to be done.
Absolutely not. It literally takes a village for to put on a wrestling show, and Tony has done. I mean, he's done some great things. I think it helps that the wrestlers themselves can bounce ideas off of him and have some input and have a lot of freedom with their promos and things. But at the end of the day, Tony's calling the shots. almost in the Vince McMahon business model there. But I think it would be helpful, not necessarily a writer's room or anything like that, where everything becomes scripted and this happens here, this happens here, this happens here. Because I think one of the great things about AEW is that it has so much more of an organic feel to it. But at the end of the day, these are still storylines. It's good guy versus bad guy over and over and over. Tony needs some help. I think that would benefit greatly Collision and Ring of Honor too.
And maybe he is thinking in those terms just by letting folks like Bryan Danielson not only compete in the ring, but have more say in putting the matches together. And you mentioned Dean Malenko. There's on the Ring of Honor side, Christopher Daniels and others who
Jerry Lynn. You've got all
Jerry Lynn.
Yeah.
Great minds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But can they book? They're great wrestlers. Can they book? I'm not sure.
We might see soon enough, because I think Tony understands that if he's going to handle these TV negotiations and all that important stuff moving forward, that he might have to let others in and not try to micromanage everything.
Right.
So hot shot booking, creative help, spreading yourself too thin. Attendance could also suffer. Outside of what we talked about at the top of the hour, when we're talking Collision specifically, Double or Nothing had some weak ticket sales. We've had several stories here lately about markets that have been a little tapped out. And now, because it's a weekly live broadcast, AEW has just committed themselves to doubling their number of live shows that they do every year, which means either trying to find new markets that aren't tapped out or hitting the markets that you've already hit twice instead of once a year, or 3 times instead of twice a year in the case of places like Chicago and things. Do you think that ticketing will be an issue? Punk, no Punk, the Canada, no Canada. Do you think long term that this actually could hurt live attendance?
So here's the thing. I have to think, from the business side, that Tony has put together plenty of feasibility studies to see where, these markets are, where they can hit these untapped markets, and recognize that, I don't know if it becomes hubris at this point, but to recognize this is an untapped market, but it's also a market that's incredibly hard to get into. Maybe there's a reason why wrestling promotions don't go into these markets, but then does it become let's give it a try? I'd like to think not. I'd like to think there's something in a spreadsheet somewhere that says this is worth the risk. Let's roll the dice and go into these untapped markets, or go into these markets where the fans are hungry for wrestling. I mean, we saw what happened when WWE went to Puerto Rico.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
When you get those markets that are hungry for wrestling, who they're just downright starved for it, right? You can have an amazing crowd, an amazing night, an amazing show, but a market that's hard to crack anyway, taking your show, I mean, that not only damages your live show, but your live show is being broadcast out into the universe, really, at that point.
So if you're like 2 or 3 shows in to Collision and people are still, you're a fan, you're watching at home, you're trying to make up your mind as to whether or not you're going to stick with it, and you have a good show, like you said, it could be a good show, but it's in front of 700 people in Regina. Right. How's that going to look? How that going to come across to us as the viewers?
Exactly. I mean, the casual fan is going to look at that and go, what is this? Nobody's into this. That's going to, I mean, like you say, even if it is a good show, you're going to have to be incredibly, incredibly careful about how it's shot. Move everybody down, darken the arena, like the old WC. And suddenly we're in the old WCW dying days then, where you move everybody down to the floor, you darken the arena as much as possible, and you construct your shots to never show that much of an audience.
So WCW is a jumping off point here for me on this next bit, because we talked the creative on the booker end. We've talked ticket sales. We've talked the business aspect. Is there a chance, and WWE experienced this problem with, it is a side effect of expansion. There became a problem, despite how much talent they had that got no TV attention, to we need to get all these guys on all the programs, and you overexpose talent. Doug, do you think now that we have Ring of Honor, Rampage, Dynamite, and Collision, do you think that some of Tony's favorite toys are going to get overexposed with this additional show?
I think absolutely the toys will get overexposed. If we were looking at true brand splits here, that might give some chance. But most of the title holders on ROH are on weekly AEW television, just so you don't. I guess maybe at this point, just so you don't forget about ROH. I don't know,
Being
but yeah,
there, yeah.
yeah. So I guess from now saying out loud, that's probably a smart business decision because everybody's not going to catch that ROH show every week, but they're going to be
Since it's not on
reminded.
free TV.
Exactly, but they're going to be reminded that it exists. But man, that's a tough one. There's so many ways where we historically look at this and say, WCW, WCW, WCW. I mean, I'm just nervous about this Collision show overall because I love AEW. Punk is what it is at this point. That's fine. There's some value that Tony Khan sees in having Punk, in his toy box rather than just discarding him. So there's that. But at the end of the day, I just do not know about this show. I hope my doomsaying is wrong, but I just got a bad feeling about this, man.
You hinted at it when you talked about unless you do an actual brand split as far as the overexposure of certain toys go. With this opportunity, would you do a brand split? Do you think a brand split would be actually a good thing for the creative side of Collision to make it seem like a different show or even must-see TV, and rather than, hey, I'll just get caught up with things on Wednesday night?
I think it could, because I think, the more we talk about it, you could go really old school on Collision and make it something very different than what you already have in Dynamite. You could like bringing FTR over, which is probably going to happen,
Yeah.
So you could really do something a bit more old school with some old school booking. I'm not saying leave all the flippity floppy high flyers on Wednesdays, because I love flippy floppy high flyers. They should be on every show. But you could do some stuff and make a legit brand split, and even from that, to ROH too, and have those cross pollinate from time to time. And maybe that's the plan. Maybe we're just armchair booking this whole thing.
They haven't announced the actual brand split. There's been rumored, but I know you're always iffy on the WWE brand split just because there really isn't what's it for? Right. I would say that if Tony could do anything to differentiate himself in this regard from what WCW and WWE did, is to actually have a brand split and stick to it and make your product different. Maybe you go and you continue booking Dynamite and give Christopher Daniels and Bryan Danielson Saturday nights. I know the old school marks would probably be more likely to tune in to a show that we knew was different.
Right.
Instead of just more of the same. I think brand splits help because, they sort of have a soft one now, and without announcing it, they've made it kind of clear in the press release and what they booked thus far for the first edition as to who is going to be on that show primarily. And so what do you think about that, Doug, as a roster? They're announcing Andrade and Miro and Thunder Rosa and FTR, and it's Punk's show. What do you think about the proposed, distribution of talent? Do you think that's at least a good start for a solid second brand if they were to keep it split?
So here's the question we should be asking. Let's say there's no AEW. Let's just say that there is a new wrestling promotion that's going to start with the talent that you just named. Are you watching on Saturday night? Yeah, exactly. The potential for it is there. Just take AEW out of the picture. That roster is going to be on this new wrestling show on Saturday nights.
And let's follow that analogy.
Okay.
If you are sat here and think to yourself, Tony Khan has had Andrade and Miro and Thunder Rosa. What's he doing with them?
Right.
You would be excited to think that, Samoa Joe would be on your TV weekly and maybe do something more with him than what we had seen thus far. So yeah, maybe we should be excited about maybe we should, well, I shouldn't say maybe. We all should. We're armchair booking here.
Right.
We're prognosticating. We will wait and see before we cast final judgment. But I think there are some reasons to be hopeful. I'm like you. I'm worried, but there is the seeds of what could be. And we're just worried that it will go that other path, the WCW path and not the SmackDown path.
Right, right. I mean, maybe we do see like a Golden Elite invasion at some point in the future. That I mean,
that would be awesome. I mean, honestly, that would be awesome. Awesome. So what does Collision need to do to not be considered the B show? I like that Saturday night is a traditional night for old school wrestling fans, but in the modern world, Saturday is also opposite football for part of the year. Also a time when that prime demographic under 49 are out doing other things on a Saturday night.
Right.
I think it's a big hill, Doug, an uphill battle for Collision. But what does Collision need to do to not be Thunder? How does it differentiate itself as must-see TV? Because Rampage could have some good matches, but honestly, if you miss Rampage on any given week, you probably aren't going to go back and watch it. What makes it different? What can they do to make sure that doesn't happen to Collision?
See, and I talked about this earlier. Your storylines don't advance from week to week. There's nothing really on Thunder that pushed the storylines that always happened on Nitro. But first of all, you've got to spin off your storyline. So I think we get back to almost like a brand split then, or at least like a soft, unspoken brand split where there are things happening on Dynamite. There's just wrestling happening on Rampage, a couple of really good matches. And then on Collision, you have storylines that are of a different fact that are evolving on that show. And then maybe, well, 4 times a year, everybody comes together. Of course, that's going to be awkward too because you don't have enough pay-per-views to do Collision pay-per-view, Dynamite pay-per-view, but you got to bring people together for those 4 big AEW pay-per-views a year. But I think they need to separate storylines and really just do a real brand split because you know how I feel about it.
So we're back though to a brand split.
Yeah,
we think that for this to really work, they need a true brand split so that the storylines that happen on Saturday night are only happening on Saturday night. And if we, the fans, want to see this talent and those storylines, we have to watch. Maybe we DVR it because we're out on Saturdays doing other things, but we still need to watch, right?
Absolutely. That because otherwise I don't, it has to have something different. It has to speak not necessarily to a different audience, but get your audience that you already have to come in for a different reason. And I don't think you can do that with talent alone. I mean, the talent goes a long, long way, especially the talent that Tony Khan has, even including CM Punk, because
he's talented.
The man can work a mic. He's got some miles on him now and a lot of years too. So, but he's still talented. I hope he doesn't get hurt on Saturday again, but I also hope he doesn't do any media scrums afterwards.
We know a lot then about what we feel anyway AEW needs to do to make Collision a success, make it not the B show. Some of the pitfalls they need to watch out for. Let's talk in the greater Tony Khan universe though. After Saturday, how does Collision change things for Rampage? Word is that Rampage is going to be kind of like the new Darks, right? It's going to be enhancement. Does that now become the obvious B show or even a C show? Is Rampage now in limbo because of this focus on Collision?
See, I've wondered that because again, I don't think really a lot happened on Rampage to advance any storylines. There wasn't any kind of big follow-ups or anything like that. Occasionally, you have some really great matches. Well, not occasionally. I think I think anybody in that AEW roster can put on a really great match, even with like you or I in the ring opposite them. But Rampage to me is known for good matches. Good to great matches every week, whereas Dynamite is where the stories happen. This is where let's call it the prime timeline. That's what's happening on the prime timeline, and then you're just getting, it's not an alternate an alternate timeline, but you're just getting like some side stories that are going on that couldn't make the cut for the main story. So you get some side stories here that are just straight up good wrestling.
So if you though turn it into an enhancement kind of show similar to what Dark was instead of what Rampage has been, does that make it like Sunday Night Heat? Does that make it like the show that becomes like there's the one good match, but then there's all this like squash matches, and I have too much wrestling to watch, so I'm going to dedicate 2 hours to Collision. I can't keep up with Rampage. I'm taking it off the DVR.
It could very well do that. And I'm afraid that's probably what's going to happen for me, honestly, unless there's something really great going on, or I get a text from you saying, hey, you've got to catch this thing that happened on.
So you personally are going to probably dedicate your watch time to see what goes on with Collision and Punk and all the drama there, and probably forego Rampage as a result?
Probably, because most of my wrestling is never watched in real time. I always catch it DVR'd, and some weeks, because of the day job, it's a struggle to get through. The 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of Dynamite, 2 hours of SmackDown, an hour of Rampage, now 2 hours of Collision. Plus, if I'm trying to catch ROH, if I'm trying to catch something that happened with New Japan.
You're not alone in that. If that's the way you feel, and that's the choices you're making as a fan, there are going to be lots of others like you who go, I want to see Collision, but I can't see Collision and keep watching Rampage. So they may have just inadvertently made Rampage obsolete, like they made Dark's obsolete and now canceled. I'll end the subject tonight, Doug, by asking you a similar question, because I think, in my personal opinion, this is where it could be even more detrimental. Let's talk about that other Tony Khan product that you brought up that does not have weekly television, that is free to view. What does this mean for ROH? Because to me, if you want to see a product that is truly different, watch ROH. For a brief period of time there, Tony Khan's ROH, was that I was like 4 or 5 weeks back checking out Honor Club on YouTube, and they had 3 or 4 episodes on there that have since disappeared. I was hopeful that, they're going to put ROH on their YouTube channel now and give it away for free so that we'll buy the pay-per-view product, which I think is smart when you have free TV access. And it was great. It was 2 hours. Outside of the champions, I know you mentioned the champions earlier, appearing a lot on Dynamite. Half of this roster, Doug, I did not even know Tony Khan employed. Like, they literally are only showing up on ROH. It's filmed at Universal Studios, so it has that small studio wrestling look.
Love that.
It has Ian Riccaboni and these different voices. It looks different. It sounds different. The talent roster is different. It is way more different than I'm afraid Collision is going to look. Still filming in the large arenas, probably with the same broadcast crew or some similar, like, AEW broadcasters that we've gotten used to hearing on other things. I'm afraid it will not look as different as Ring of Honor looks. It's going to look like AEW, whether you're watching Wednesdays or Saturday nights. To that end, though, what does this all mean for Ring of Honor long-term? Do you think Ring of Honor can remain viable with Tony's attention where it is, and Ring of Honor being something you have to pay for, as opposed to all this great stuff that Tony gives away for free every week?
So let me start by saying, I think if I have to pay for it, I expect it to be a premium thing. It should be premium content. And I know that the talent that has gone through ROH and the talent that is at ROH, even though I can't name the entire roster right now, that's premium talent. But what do you do to get that premium talent over? How do you, if you're trying to do it on your free programming to drive people towards your paid premium content, I don't think it's really working. It's not being executed in a way that says, hey, these guys are here, go here and watch them. These guys are here, go here and watch them. I don't know what happens to ROH here. I mean, ROH was literally a steal for anybody, and Tony needed it to get, that all in pay-per-view more than anything. But he has this ROH, backlog of everything ROH now, which is great, which is a lot of his wrestlers, a lot of WWE wrestlers. I just don't know where ROH goes.
I think they're going to be, sadly, the odd man out. I know way back in January when we were doing our 2022 year in review, and we at our annual award show at the end, we give some really wild predictions, like what is like the craziest thing, like make some crazy wild predict. I think I predicted that Ring of Honor would be absorbed into larger AEW. I think this move to Collision just increases the likelihood of that happening. I have all this airtime on television now, and I have all these rosters I need to fill. Can I dedicate a weekly Universal Studios studio show and justify an entire separate roster when I can take the best of that crew, distribute them amongst my other programming? I'm afraid Ring of Honor may long-term be the losers in this deal. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that that maybe out of this deal comes a great contract with Warner Brothers Discovery and includes streaming on Max, and ROH gets its own show. Would be I think the great end result from all of this is this somehow becomes a springboard for Ring of Honor to finally get that free week of television that they've so desperately needed. But I'm afraid it might end up being the opposite, Doug.
That would be the dream, but yeah, I mean, I think the best Ring of Honor. Hopefully, I was joking about an Elite or a Golden Elite, invasion earlier, but I think it writes itself where you have a ROH, a unified ROH, actually invading Collision and saying, "Hey, this should be our show." That's about the best storyline that ROH can get out of this, I think.
And with that, fans, we have looked at about every angle we can think of. There's nothing more to do now other than sit and watch and wait, and then we can evaluate. I say let's all give it a fair shot because it's exciting. Whether this is what we will later look at as the beginning of the end, or what we later look at as this is what took AEW to that next level of competition, there's no doubt about it that this is the most important moment in the history of AEW since they actually formed the company. So to that end, Doug, let's just watch and wait and see.
Let's do it. I'm ready. Actually, I'll be watching it, struggling to catch it. But anyway.
Well, let's catch this, Doug. Let's catch a big finish. Why don't we?
Let's do it.
Botch of the week.
It's not even here yet, but I want to talk about, keep it on topic because I think Collision is a botch. I think bringing not Collision itself is a botch, but bringing CM Punk back to Collision is a botch. I don't think the show needed it. Clearly, Tony Khan, there was a thought at one time that he did not think it needed it. There's a lot of talent out there that could have carried the show, a lot of talent that he has. And I just think it's a botch to bring Punk back. We touched on it earlier in the show. I just think that's the botch for me.
I can't argue with you on that one because I agree that I don't need Punk as big a fan as I was. And it has, I can look back historically and appreciate the work that he's done, the body of work, the matches, but fool me once, right? Like Tony Khan should know what he has here, and he may have jeopardized his chance of success. I'm still hopeful that Collision is a success despite Punk, but I do believe it'll be something that will have to overcome. So Punk as a botch, I will not argue with. My botch is actually the other company, and that is what WWE announced this week when Alba Fire and I forgot the But anyway, they are uniting the NXT women's tag titles with the Raw/SmackDown women's titles. So what this means is Isla Dawn. There we go. Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, who are great in NXT, but they got drafted. They were the NXT women's tag team champions. So you would think would leave the titles behind, as Indy Hartwell did when she got drafted. Instead, they were allowed to take their titles. And now we find out that essentially what we're doing is we're only going to have one female tag team division across Raw, SmackDown, and I guess when they want to show up down there, NXT. To me, this feels like a step back in all the progress we've made in women's wrestling. And this is not letting AEW off the hook either, because they have no women's tag team division to speak of. Because didn't they, for a minute, have a cup that you could wrestle for a women's tag team?
That's right.
Yeah. It went away. No one mentions it like it never happened. But I think that just you want to prove, Sasha Banks and Trinity do stuff like this.
Yeah.
and yeah, do stuff like this, and it lets Miss Monet be able
Mm-hmm.
to correctly say, and this is why we walked out on these guys.
Yeah, exactly. Your botch, I cannot disagree with either, my friend.
How about performance, Doug? How about your
Man,
performer of the week?
I tell you, I've got to give two out this week. All within the same segment. But I really love what Adam Cole, MJF, that interaction there, exchanging promos. That is great. That is great. Babyface heel interaction, and really, is there a better heel in wrestling right now than MJF? I
No.
mean, so I said it earlier about Hogan and Sheik. It takes two, and those two just brought it. It was just a great. I think my performers last week was Don Callis with his
Yeah.
bringing the heat for everything. Nothing in ring. Well, I mean, it takes place in the ring, but these are more advancing storylines and just working crowds and just showing what it takes to be great. Really.
So I am so glad you called that out because I was going to say MJF because I thought it was fantastic. While I liked everybody in the Four Pillars match and think they're all talented, to me that was too many opponents to try to keep up with. Seeing MJF go one-on-one in a back and forth verbal contest and make it someone like Adam Cole, who we've not really seen him with, I will not at all argue with that. And it was probably the performance of the week. I made myself, though, a note that I was going to call that one, and so I'm glad you did, because then I watched Rampage. And going into that main event, four-way main event, I wasn't sure which of those women, all three of whom have held gold previously or were around the main event scene. I didn't know which one of those three was going to end up the number one contender. I just knew it was Sky Blue that was going to be taking the pinfall, and instead Blue wins.
Yeah.
She has been a favorite of. She's one of those few that came out of the dark system where you're just on there as enhancement talent, and she showed me like, okay, there's way more to this lady than just being enhancement talent. And I know she's not going to beat Tony, but I'm hopeful that we look back and say that moment they let her win in a match that also had like your Britt Bakers that got Sky Blue to the next level, because I think that she could be a major player down the line. She's like 23, so she's got time, but I'm hopeful that this is her being elevated and not just being that really good hand that loses every week in a competitive match. Biggest win of her young career, no doubt.
Right.
And if I could give us like an honorable mention, I gotta say, like, I watched MLW's YouTube show this week. Honorable mention to Willie Mack, just for a great. Sometimes it's the small things in wrestling. He's being interviewed. They're talking about his match with Johnny Nitro or John, whatever Johnny, whoever he is this week.
Johnny MLW this week.
Yeah. And the interviewer asked what his strategy was, and Willie, unlike every other dumb baby face, goes, "Why would I tell you that?" And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "I'm not going to tell anybody." He goes, "Girl, that's a camera there. I know how wrestling works." I know how wrestling works is the line of the week.
I know how wrestling works. I love it. I love it.
Willie Mack is underutilized, but way to go, Willie. Match of the week, Doug. There were several good ones to choose from this week. I'm eager to hear what you liked.
So again, I caught wrestling in snippets this week. So mine is again not a necessarily in ring performance, but more of what it advances yet again. Because if you look back at the SmackDown main event this week, it was very, very by the book. We knew Austin Theory was not dropping that belt. We just didn't know how. We expected interference. I mean, it was really a by the numbers kind of match, but it was great for what it was, because like a lot of bloodline stuff, it takes what's going on and sets the table for what's to come. And for that alone, I'm going to say, well done WWE. Well done. You've done it, like I say, by the book, by the numbers. Could not have booked it any other way, but yet it takes it and perfectly situates it to what comes next. And they have consistently been great at doing that with the bloodline. The matches are always about what comes after the match for the bloodline. And I think it was that way with this.
Not going to disagree with you on that. My match of the week, though, I'm giving WWE a shout out for what they did on Monday night for another match that, while not as storyline based, I knew going in, I'm like, yeah, this one, neither of these guys can lose this match. So there's going to be something screwy that happens here.
Right.
But I'm hopeful that this sets the stage for a larger feud or more of this down the road because they worked so stiff and well together. But Gunther versus KO was fantastic. And it was one of those things where as you watch them suplex and beat the crap out of each other, chop each other's chest, like more of that, please. If nothing else, please. If that was the test drive for would the fans want a Gunther Kevin Owens feud for the Intercontinental title, the answer to that is yes.
Yes, gotcha. All right,
absolutely yes. So with that, fans, that is the Two Bros Wrestling Show for this week. Doug, we are leaving the folks with a lot to watch next week.
Yes.
Watch Collision.
Watch
you. Because next Sunday night, you are going to preview for the folks Forbidden Door, which is, as you and I were talking before we went on air, I mean, it's Danielson Okada.
Right.
You've got to buy this regardless of what else is happening, right?
I mean, if that doesn't make you, here, let me, Osprey and Kenny, Osprey Omega 2. Come on.
It's shaping up to be quite the pay-per-view. Doug's going to have a rundown for you and his predictions. And then after that, we're off for 2 Sundays because the following Sunday is Forbidden Door itself. We're not going to go opposite the pay-per-view.
Not.
We're going to be watching. And then it's 4th of July week, Money in the Bank weekend. And we will get back with you in 3 weeks' time after that. So watch Doug next week. And I'll see you in July. Doug, take care of the people for me.
I'm going to try, Kevin. I'm going to try.
See you, folks.
Good night, everybody.